All right, welcome to the June 19th, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. We'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to check my audio connection and make sure that it's okay. And we'll have people get logged in. Just bear with me for a minute. Okay, so what we're going to be doing today is our Club Cubase Google Hangout. If you haven't been on one, how it basically works is people could ask questions. They could be submitted in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Or you could enter them into the live chat field. If you're watching this live, you can enter it in the live chat field. We'll try to have all the different topics indexed for later tonight, so we can see all the different questions. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, please feel free to tell us who you are and where you're from. My name is Greg Ondo. I'm presenting from outside Washington, D.C. in Alexandria, Virginia. So if you want to tell us where you're from and if you have questions, you could please feel free to go ahead and ask. And if you're watching this live, you could do that. If you're watching this on a rebroadcast, you don't have to introduce yourself. You are, of course, welcome to. And you may want to, if you're watching the broadcast, skip ahead to about 10 minutes. And at that point, we will probably have everyone logged in, that are getting logged in live. So, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. We'll go for several hours today. And if you want to ask your question, just enter it in the chat field if you're watching the Hangout live. If we could try to shy away from maybe not asking the same question repeatedly, we'll try to get through all the questions as we can, as quickly and succinctly as possible. But if you ask the same question repeatedly, it just kind of clogs up the entire chat area, and also just makes it the whole Hangout a bit slower to navigate for me. So I'd appreciate that. So we'll go ahead and we'll see where some people are getting logged in. So we have people getting logged in as we do this. Okay, so let's see who we have. We've seen some familiar faces here and familiar names. So we see Ace. All right, we have Jay from New Haven, Connecticut. All right, we have Sir Robert from Atlanta. Good to see you on a Hangout. All right, so seeing some. All right, so we have Texas City. Okay, we have Kenosha, Wisconsin. All right, so we have Tehran and Iran, Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. Good to see Taylor. Okay, so just seeing some more questions. All right, so we see Taylor, see Millard Brown from Pennsylvania is wishing my family well. We're doing great. Thank you. Okay, so we have Netherlands. Okay, so we have Ottawa, Greece. We have Jan from Stockholm. I hope I've been saying his name right instead of Jan, as most Americans would say. All right, so we have Michael from Weatherford, Texas. All right, Cape Town, South Africa. All right, so we have the African continent represented. We have Vietnam. That's great. Corona, California. So we have Asia. All right. We have Europe, North America. All right. So we have Cape Town, Corona, California. All right. So we'll just, and once again, please, after you introduce yourself, we have Canada, La Mirada, Manchester, Toronto. Okay, we're just letting people get logged in. There's more people logging in. And probably like many of you during our current health situation, my family is at home. So I'll apologize. You may hear my wife, who's on many conference calls throughout the day, upstairs directly above me. And my son is watching some Disney films. So we will probably get interrupted. So I wanted to apologize in advance for that. So if you could bear with me, I may have to turn on a new show or a new movie for him. All right, so we have North Carolina, Riverside, Suffolk, UK, Manchester. And if you want to send questions in advance, you could send them to Club Cubase at steinberg.de. And if I have to come up with like something a little more involved in having a demo project that's been created, we could do that quite easily. We have a macro that someone wanted created today, so we'll give that a shot. Okay, we're about 2 or 3 more minutes and we'll get started. Thanks for everyone's patience. All right, so we have South Shields, England. We have El Paso, Texas. All right, so we have Sweden. Yes, I've heard from several people that the summer solstice is a big holiday in Sweden, so it's great that you guys celebrate it like that. Always wanted to go to Sweden. Haven't made it there yet. All right, we'll get started about 2 minutes. Okay, so see a comment from the last hangout that Wavelab LE going to Elements, that they got an activation code from Zoom. Glad that worked out. All right, so we have a fellow Virginian and William Thompson. What part of Virginia are you in, William? I'm in Alexandria. All right, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, so we have Brazil, we have South America present. That's great. It's always fascinating seeing people from all over the world on the Hangouts. All right, so maybe another 30 seconds and we'll get started. Radford, Virginia. So many of my friends went to school there. Okay, so it's about 10 minutes after, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I just think let me just check my field here. So, okay, so question. Hi, Greg. Hope you're doing well. Cubase 10.5. How to auto extract individual guitar runs from a recording I was sent, which has silence in between licks, and then save them in Groove Agent banks. So let's say if I have a guitar part here, which I think I have, and I will open up a new instance of Groove Agent here, and I'll just kind of we'll cut the kit that's currently loaded on it. So if you wanted to take any guitar run that you have, we could just select it here. So let's say if I wanted to just kind of zoom in. So if I wanted to just grab my range selection tool, at this point I could just select that particular range. So if I want that guitar, I could do that. I could also just grab that, drag it to a particular sample. Say I want directly onto a pad, like so. If I want to take just different portions of the file, and again, we could just kind of zoom in and say, I want this particular lick from here to here. Drag it to the pad. So just kind of like so. And now at this point, you could just trigger those particular so at that point you could just take different ranges over and have those ranges on your different pads. So at that point you could just take any of your different sections and use the range tool and drag them onto a pad. And if you wanted to save that as a Groove Agent kit, all you'd have to do is to right click and we choose to export the kit with the samples, and then you could call that up in any other project. But this way you could also take an entire file if you wanted to. So let me just cut this particular kit. Some people will also like to take a guitar part over. So let's say the entire WAV file here. And some people will choose to do slices, and then each slice could be mapped onto individual pads as well. But this wouldn't necessarily get rid of the silence like you asked for. So what you want to do is to just use the range selection tool, and then select the range that you want and just drag that right onto a pad itself. And then you could choose to do all the edits as you see fit, and that way you could have all the silences be gone. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg from New Haven, Connecticut. Would like to raise an upgrade issue for Steinberg, cross-grade for non-Steinberg. Those users don't have to surrender licenses. We upgrading from Cubase to Nuendo have to choose. One could argue Nuendo has Cubase already. However, two arguments. We may only want Cubase on laptops and Nuendo on powerful desktop. More important, Nuendo updates slower. So more important, Nuendo updates slower than flagship Nuendo. So outsiders enjoy all of what they love, and we get limited price. Could be argued as we pay less, but we are the ones loyally buying, investing in Steinberg. So we should. Thank you for your time. If this could be shared with the company, I believe they'll harbor even more loyalty and goodwill from the Steinberg users. So I understand the concept of when you are working and you upgrade, you choose to do an upgrade from Cubase to Nuendo that you don't have a separate license. And, so you forfeit your Cubase license, but you have the Nuendo version, which has, currently it's at feature parity between the two, except for, I believe, VST Transit. But, you're not able to necessarily run Cubase on your previous one. And, that's one of the, reasons that you do get your Nuendo upgrade at a significant discount. So, I'm pretty sure that the management and they've had discussions about this issue before. I'll gladly pass it on, but I'm not sure if things will change, and that's kind of what you get for saving all the money and getting into Nuendo at a significant discount. So, but I think you're going to be in good shape. And, there may be other, if you really needed a separate license of Cubase, there may be separate Cubase promotions coming in the future that are very attractive as well. But I'll definitely kind of reiterate your concept. Okay, so let's see. Okay. So you see, hey, Greg, question about visibility agents, show channels, tracks at cursor position. I've set a key command for this. Is it possible to have it automatically follow the arrangement so I don't need to press this key command regularly, or is it just automatically shows any tracks with data at the current and moving cursor position? I said would be cool. So if you're not familiar with this function, if you only had particular tracks playing, so let's say if I come here, I have my range selection tool and I don't have, different tracks playing at different moments in time. So if I come here, I could just see only tracks. So when we go to our visibility agent, let's make sure I have it enabled here. So one of the configurations would be that it would show as kind of a preset that you could show tracks that are only playing at the cursor position, and it would hide everything. So let's say we're going to say show tracks that are at the current cursor position, and then it's only going to show tracks that are actually playing at that particular cursor position. So I guess what the question is wanting that to be constantly updated. So if we wanted to go back to our visibility agents, and we'll show all tracks, for that to be dynamically updated. And I think the problem is, and it seems like a noble thing and a good idea at first, but when you realize that your lead vocal is here and then moves over 8 tracks and, moves all the way over here, then here, then here, then here, when your tracks are moving targets, I think it gets to be very problematic. So you could be mixing here and all of a sudden the fader would jump because of the visibility agent, and then it would be here, then it could be here, then back here. So I think while it seems like it's a cool thing to do, that, the practicality of it when your mix console is constantly moving would be kind of far outweighed by any convenience that it would offer. So I think if you start to look at it kind of, and think about it, that could be problematic when the track you're mixing is constantly jumping back and forth. So, but if you think about it, I think that may make sense. All right. Okay. So we see question: when I slow tempo to record MIDI keyboard, only the MIDI tracks adjust tempo, but the audio tracks are out of time. I want the audio track playing back at the same speed as the MIDI tracks. So we could do this as long as the audio tracks have a tempo stamp. So if you've recorded them, and there's a tempo information, and we could look into our audio pool. So if we go to our pool window, we want to make sure that all the tracks here are going to have a tempo that's the correct tempo. And we want to make sure that these are also in musical mode. So now if I wanted to slow down, because when we record a MIDI, it's not the actual audio, but when, so you could slow the tempo down and play a part in MIDI. But unless you have the audio files themselves in musical mode, and you could also select all the events on the project window, and from the info line, make sure that musical mode is turned on. And now whenever you change the tempo of your project, so if I come here and I want to slow down to 60 beats a minute, I hit enter, or 360, sorry. So let's say I do 60 beats a minute. So now all the audio will play back. Or if I want to be 120. So whatever tempo you have that you enter in, your audio will now follow. So just make sure that you have the audio tracks in musical mode, and then whatever tempo that you have for the project, it will automatically, your audio will then kind of follow whatever tempo that you have in the project. Okay, so let's take a look. Question from Taylor. Can you explain the edit controls in Beat Agent? So I think we'll have a kit here. I'll just revert this quickly. Okay, so let's take a look at Beat Agent. So when you work with Groove Agent, there's Beat Agent as well as the Acoustic Agent. So when we want to come over here, so let's say if we want to do edit mode, so let's say for the instrument, I assume. So here I could hear my different samples. So if I wanted to make, and this could work on what is selected, and we could gauge what is actually selected we see this little orange outline. So if I wanted to make this kick louder or adjust the panning so it's only on the left or right, we could also adjust tuning. So if I wanted to come here, we could make it pitched higher or lower. And there's fine tuning, so that's coarse tuning and fine tuning. There's different modes that you could have. So if you wanted to be more of a 12-bit, like if you're working with more vintage drum machines, and there's also a turntable algorithm. So some people in the old days with samplers would sample, when you had 1 megabyte of memory, would sample at at 45 would sample at the higher like a 45 RPM for a 33 and a third, and then slow it down to save on sample space. So that's what turntable would give you. That there's going to be different filters. When we go to pitch here, we could adjust pitch in a number of different ways. So if I wanted to, again, I have my coarse or tune, but if I wanted to do like an envelope, I can now come here and say just to my kick, and you could adjust the envelope amount as well. So if I wanted this to, go down and up, or, whatever you want it to kind of accomplish here. So let's just adjust that. So if I want it, or kind of do the opposite. So that's kind of what you could do with the pitch. You could also choose to have filters. So as you come here, if you wanted to take your snare and enable filters, so there's, multiple filter types. So if you wanted to do like synthesis on different filters to change the tone. So as soon as I kind of come here, we'll just say, let's adjust our resonance. And then as we go over here, if you wanted to go to your amplifier section, here we could, again, adjust the volume. But if we have effects in the mixer, such as like an auxiliary send, so if I have a reverb, so I'll just open up, let's say, a reverence reverb, and I'll go back to my amplifier section. And at this point, I could say, okay, I want to take this kick and add the reverb to it, but not on this particular sound. So you can have 4 independent auxiliary sends if you wanted to do sample editing for choosing kind of like different start or end positions, or kind of do a slight fade in for samples. You could do that. There's slice, so if you have different loops that you want to incorporate, you could do slices of that. And then different MIDI effects, so if you wanted to come over here and just add different rudiments, you could just say, okay, as I hit this particular sound, we could now, activate our different rudiments if we wanted to do flams or drags. So we could just kind of come over here and have different, or if you wanted different delays for each sound as well, I could come here and just let's add different delays. So I wanted to have, 5 repeats. So we could have MIDI data kind of be regenerated. So that's a quick overview of some of the edit functions that you could have for the beat agents in Cubase. Okay, so we have a question from Taylor. When a section repeats in an arranger track, can it be shown with repeats in the score editor? I want to say that there's some kind of accommodation for that. Let me just set up like an arranger track here quickly. So if I have something like just a blank MIDI part, and I will add an arranger track. Okay, so let's say if I wanted to add kind of different parts of the arranger chain here. Okay, so now when we come to our score editor, let's say for this part, and I'm not sure if it will actually put the repeats in. Let me just see if I... thought that there was a little bit of accommodation for this. It wasn't so obvious. Let me just... So if we go to the arranger... So I think you could have the parts kind of in the score editor repeat to follow the arranger track. So let me just try it really quickly. I'm just entering some parts here. It may not put a repeat in, but it may just populate. Okay, so let's say if I just kind of draw in a couple, let me just put in step entry mode here quick. Okay, I'll just start entering in some data, let's say right around here. I may have a problem with my IAC driver. Bear with me just for a second. Got to unassign that. But I don't think it's going to show up as repeats, but it may automatically. Sorry, I sent this accidentally through a MIDI loop back. Let me see if I can just exit out of Cubase quickly here. Bear with me. All right, my son's knocking on the door. Hang on one second. All right, sorry about that. So let's say if I add an instrument track, I'll just try this one more time quickly. And I'll just enter in some different notes here. All right, so now if I wanted to take this, we look at this in our score editor. Okay, so let's say we have that, and let's add a arranger track. Okay, so let me just... And let's see if we go to our full score. Let's put this into page mode. Okay, and let's come over here. Let's activate the arranger part. So if I come here, let's see if this changes. So I don't think it's going to actually put in the actual repeats. So, but if you wanted it, to try that, you could, once you have this laid out, flatten the arranger chain, and then that would show it in the score editor. Okay, so question, why Cubase freezes, lag, stall, refresh for 10 seconds when clicking in a name track window where the solo mute buttons are. This happens every time I click on East West Play VST on i7, 16 gigabytes of RAM. So if it's probably going to be, if it's only happening with the East West instrument, there's that would be indicative that there's going to be something with the East-West instrument that maybe, I'm not sure if it's probably not a VST3 plugin, but it could be, if you're only having problems with the East-West, you may want to check to see if there's anything in a play engine that could be causing that. I haven't worked with the East-West, but, anytime that I would kind of click into, let's say if I added a number of instrument tracks here, just double clicking on a name, I've never run into any problems with that. So I would see if there's maybe like a buffering issue with the East-West Play engine, that maybe when it's selected, it's, maybe taking time to load up the instrument. But maybe someone else could comment if they've run into something similar. So a question, when I get a license for AI with an interface, can I give AI to a student, or is the license connected to the interface? I think they may need the serial number of the interface to authorize it, but it's not tied directly to the interface, but they may need the serial number, and it's your license and you could do with it what you want. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. Best to you and your family. Hope you're doing well. Millard from Pennsylvania. Thanks, Millard. We're doing great. Okay, so another question from Taylor. When freezing MIDI modifiers on an Apache SX sequence, what would cause it to not reproduce the arpeggio accurately? So I think I've always had, great luck with that, but let's go ahead and take a quick look. So if I want to go to my MIDI inserts, we just load up a new project here. All right, so let's say, okay, so I have like kind of a bass patch, and I'll go to Apache. I think it was SX. Just reread it. Okay, so now I come here. So I'm just gonna record a chord here. So I'll just. So I'm just holding down a chord and. So when I go to look at it here, we can see that my part is just, two, very simple block chords that have been kind of recorded. So that's what's been recorded. And then it goes back through the Apache MIDI inserts. So now if I wanted to embed that, what you could do is just kind of click directly. Let's say if I want to make sure, let's just check kind of where the start positions are of the notes. So it's not going to be on beat, probably off the grid a bit. So I go to my MIDI, we'll select just this particular part, and we'll choose the freeze MIDI modifiers, which then turns that into the arpeggio. I've seen sometimes where people will have their actual notes be a little bit early, like where, they recorded it a little bit early. And at that point, it might it could throw off the Apache, what's being generated by the arpeggiator, where it may not hear it initially when it's kind of playing back, but when it's rendered. So make sure that, try, one thing to try is to try, just quantizing the actual event. So let's say if I want this to be, quantized to, just to a whole note or a quarter note, at this point, you could choose kind of, make sure that you have the quantized barvalue set. Because if you do a freeze MIDI modifiers and it's off initially, then all the arpeggios are being generated could also be off. Let's see, does Cubase have a plugin that creates a screaming or vocal fry effect on a vocal that isn't screaming? So it's I've seen people kind of use distortion plugins for this. Let's do something horribly inappropriate. Take a ballad and try to maybe do a screaming. See what we could do. You can play around with some of the different plugins. You may want to check out like Quadrifuzz could be kind of a fun one if you wanted to add kind of creative distortion. So I'll come over here and it's just add under distortion, Quadrifuzz, and there's probably going to be a number of like vocal presets. So let's say male vocals, grind. So we'll go ahead and listen to it and see what this could be. Really awful. So now I'm just going to turn this on. You know, so with quadrifuzz, you know, let's try a couple. Let's try another. And we'll just solo the vocal here.
So afraid to smile, you think that I change my mind. I can't forget.
So maybe, you know, if you even maybe put that on a send, let's try that where you can bring it in to different amounts. So if I'll go to my sends here and we'll just add a quadrifuzz as a send.
What a sorry in your eyes.
So let's say it's turned off.
How can I feel you? How can I see you when you run and hide from the light? I just walk a straight line out of the shadow.
So, you know, I would maybe try, you know, experimenting with quadrifuzz. I think you might be able to find some stuff in there. If there's any plugin that would be kind of good for that, that would probably do the trick. Okay. But it's probably always best to get a screaming vocal when you can. Okay, question. Can preferences be assigned to key commands? I'd like to be able to change preferences quickly with a shortcut key. So yeah, definitely I do this all the time. So when you go to your key commands, you'll see kind of a whole dedicated section. So we'll come here. So when you just see an entire section for preferences, so you could have key commands to toggle on and off different preferences for when you need it. So I think just about all the preferences can be assigned via key commands. So, question: if an insert is moved from a mono to a stereo track, will the insert adapt to the track configuration? So yes, it will. So whatever type of channel width, so if you're on a mono track, so let's come here. So let's say if we have our quadrifuzz.
Tell me why something's wrong. We can't go on.
So let's say if I have my grand here, we'll switch to our inserts.
How can I feel you? How can I see you when you run and hide from the light?
Make this a little smaller.
Be someone tonight.
So now we saw the piano. The piano's taking those same settings and it's doing the distortion in both channels. So yeah, it'll automatically adapt to whatever channel configuration that you're on. Okay, so let's move on. Thanks for all the great questions. All right, we have a new attendee from Greece. Thanks for joining us. All right, so Brighton, Denmark, Argentina, Portugal. Okay, so a question from Michael. Will you walk us through Vari Audio for tuning vocal tremolos? So let's go ahead and take a look. So Vari Audio is very powerful for doing a lot of great vocal stuff, and a lot of times, I've always found that you've never really had to add vibrato, but often take vibrato away. So if we wanted to I'll just blow this up so we can see it a little easier, and let's do some Vari Audio on this particular section. So
You stare at the ground, not a sound. Tell me why something's wrong.
okay, so if we wanted to do some, when we see our pitch variations here, some of the things that you may.
At the ground.
So let's say on this particular note, we're hearing just a little too much vibrato,
At the ground.
but maybe in just like different portions. So I could actually, if I wanted to just kind of tame the vibrato, you could actually split the words by just going to the bottom. And you have two different modes. I usually like the smart controls. And now at this point, you could just straighten the pitch curve just kind of in the middle of a particular note. So if that was like just a little too much for you, you can now just.
You stare at the ground, not a sound.
Now, something else that you could do that's also interesting once you're in kind of the larger, once you have the advanced tools, often dealing, with vibratos could be tricky. Sometimes people may tend to drift at particular points. So you could see this little diamond here. So at this point, if I wanted to, at the end of their vibrato, if they were just if they went a little too flat or too sharp, you could kind of regulate that. You could also just come here and just kind of tame the vibrato overall. And if you wanted to, tilt the pitch, you could hold down the Alt key and just kind of grab the edge here. One thing that also you may run into is you may want to not really affect the transition between notes can be really critical when doing vibrato. So if we see these little triangles here in the upper corners, I could grab that point here and this point. And now I could just choose to grab the center point here, and I could tame that without affecting kind of the transitions between notes. So if I wanted that note to just be, going in and out to be fine, but in the middle to have the vibrato, to have that kind of function like that, we could do that very easily.
You stare at the ground, not a sound.
So those are some of the tricks you could do with the vibrato that can make a difference in the Vari Audio. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Is it possible to change the default MIDI input for new instrument tracks to specific MIDI keyboard? So let's just see if it's in the add track dialog. So let's choose if we do an instrument track. Okay, it's not there. So sometimes this could be set by the operating system, but let's see if we go to our MIDI port setup. So if we go to Studio, So I think that this is, at least on Mac, it might be kind of configured automatically for, based on the operating system. So I think it might be based on the OS. But if there, let me know if there's a reason why you don't want to have it default to all MIDI inputs. And that would be helpful with Steven. All right. Okay, going through different comments. Great to see so many people on the Hangout. Okay, so question. Hello, is it normal for the MIDI fader or pan of the MIDI track assigned to Groove Agent to fail? So let's just open up Groove Agent. So it seems like it's maybe running as a MIDI track. So I'm going to add it as a rack instrument here. Okay, so now when we go to our mix console, we'll see our MIDI fader and down. And let me just go ahead and play. I'll load up a kit and... So that seems to be kind of, the MIDI fader seems to be controlling the MIDI volume of that. And the panning seems to be controlling the panning as expected here. So I haven't really seen that fail, but if you're running it as a VST instrument rack, that's when you see it as the MIDI fader, but you may not see that as the fader for an instrument. So if it's an instrument track, it's kind of consolidated, but I haven't seen any problems with that. But let me know if I'm doing it differently than you are. Okay. Okay, just my timeline jumped. Let me just go back. Okay, so question. I also noticed my audio performance meters moving up and down while Cubase is just sitting there doing nothing. Is that normal? So probably what it is you may, if you see the indicators here, kind of, this may not be audio, but if you see this performance, like, a lot of people see this kind of constantly going on in the background. And that could be a MIDI activity. So some MIDI controllers will actually constantly spit out active sensing information. So it kind of sends a little MIDI message saying, hey, I'm here. Don't forget me. Hey, I'm here. Don't forget me. Hey, I'm here. Don't forget me. And I think Yamaha keyboards are guilty of this, where all of a sudden you just kind of see this annoying little activity kind of constantly going on. So make sure that it's probably going to be MIDI that's doing it, and it could just be active sensing on your MIDI controller. So it's probably that. So you may want to see if you could turn that off on your MIDI controller and see if that makes a difference for you. But if you're kind of seeing that, I think it's going to be MIDI information. And sometimes you have control surfaces that also will spit out active sensing information. All right. So we have people from Chicago and Lynchburg, Virginia. Used to play in the Lynchburg Symphony when I was in college at JMU. All right. So you see William, who works at Radford University. That's great. Also in Virginia. Many of my high school friends went there. Okay. So question. Okay. So we covered that already. Okay, so we have okay, so Groove Agent is not working. There are no sounds. When I look for a sample, the find missing samples window opens and it says 8,839 missing files. I would make sure that, you go to, make sure that if you did a full install. I know some people will only, not do the full install of the 21 gigabytes of content. But you could also, if we wanted to come here, there's, I think, the library manager program. Let me see if I have it out here. So, try going to your Steinberg library manager and, make sure that you will see like the Groove Agent tab and make sure that you have these samples activated here and these links. So you may have to make sure that you have the full download, but, you could go to your Steinberg library manager and make sure that all of the sounds that you have, this is where you could see where they're actually installed to. So you may want to make sure that you see the reference in the Steinberg Library Manager utility. But you should, with the normal installation, everything will be installed for you. Okay. Hi, Greg. If I make some changes on VST and I don't like those changes, how do I undo it and go back to where I was a step before? So if it's with like a VST plugin, so if I come here, excuse me. Yeah, I wanted this to go to the master fader here, and let's say I come over here, I adjusted this. I wanted to adjust the EQ, and I adjusted the volume. So if you hit Alt or Option Z, you have kind of unlimited undos within your mix console. So if you wanted to just come here, so let's say if I'm on my stereo out, I adjust that. Let's adjust the EQ. I had a plug-in. So I wanted to come here, adjust this. I wanted to, switch plugins. I wanted to come here, have a brick wall limiter. I wanted to get rid of that plugin. So now I'm just going to hit Alt or Option Z. And you have a separate undo history for the mix console and different effects as well. So, and let me just see if it's for a VST instrument. So within the mix console, you could do that. And often within VST instruments, you may have your own unlimited levels of undo within the instrument, like we see here in Groove Agent or within Halion. So try all, Option Z, and that should allow you to undo different functions within the mix console. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. How do I ensure that Cubase maintains the same interface settings each time I start up? The easiest way to do that is to make sure that, when you start up that your interface is powered on and that no other interfaces are actually, going to be different that are available for Cubase to use. So, depending on your setup, I know a lot of people that, turn on their audio interface after they start Cubase, or they hit one button, everything turns on, and maybe the interface hasn't powered on before the computer, so make sure if you do that, you shouldn't have many problems with that. So I like on my studio machine, I don't have any problems with it kind of choosing, going to the same interface. And you could also save your startup as a template, and that should automatically refer to the interface that was stored with the template. Okay, so hey Greg, is there a way to change CC data on multiple tracks at once without a logical editor? Like if I have two MIDI parts selected and want to decrease modulation on both at once, I think the best way currently is to use the logical editor. So let me just add a couple MIDI tracks here. So let's say if I have some modulation data here. All right, I'm just going to try something. See if I group these together. Yeah, so I think the best way of modifying your CCs on multiple tracks would be using the logical editor. I think I've had some discussions on stuff that can make that better in the future, which we may see eventually. But I think using the logical editor currently is the best solution for that. Okay, so question, the logical editor is an advanced tool and use macro is an advantage. Is it possible to share a macro with colleagues? If not possibly, or possibly the best way? So what you could do is, the macros are going to be stored as key command files. So you could store these as presets, and you could, pass on your key command preset to another colleague. And if they wanted to just simply open that up, you could do that. Another method of transferring over key commands and macros is just using the profile manager. So if you go to your edit menu, here you can edit and save a profile and then just send that profile to someone else. And the one thing to be cognizant of is, even if someone has created a macro, for them to load up your macro, they're going to load up all of your keyboard shortcuts. So like when I do macros, I try to, always include a screenshot because it's not terribly hard to make a macro. And that way you're not going to mess up anyone's screen. But make sure that the person saves their key commands first and saves their profile first before loading yours up, just as a safety. Okay. Are there possibilities to input and output gain at the same time, or do I have to switch settings for that every time? I'm not sure if you mean the input and output gain on the mix console or just on the faders. But if you want it to, let's say if we have a number of audio tracks here, and we go to our mix console, I think you could even go to your key commands. So, here you can see your input channels and your output channels correspondingly. So that's your input and output there. But if you want to see it on for metering, perhaps, let's see, you could always right click if you're not familiar with the concept and go to your global meter settings and choose your meter position. But let's see if there's a keyboard shortcut for that. right, so let me just start at the top here. So it doesn't look like there's a keyboard shortcut for that. So you might have to still kind of just come here for your audio tracks and change meter position. I'll just take another look just in case. Okay, so looks like here under mixer that you could set up different keyboard shortcuts for input meters, post fader, post panner, or meters reset. But I don't think it's going to be the input and output gain at the same time. But let me know if I'm misunderstanding your question, or if you wanted to see something else. But if you wanted to see, input channels here, you could see your input channels and output channels as well simultaneously. Okay, so the other day I saw you pulled out a great acoustic piano app. I can't find it. Can you show us how to find it? Okay, so probably the one piano that I may have used, and one I use on a lot of my projects, is going to be, so just a little bit of it here is the Grand. So this one's sold separately. It's also part of the Absolute 4. So I'm not sure if this is the piano you're talking or referring to, but I think it's it's still my favorite piano instrument here. Just find where the Grand is here. So let's jump ahead here a little bit. So this is always still like my favorite piano. I have all the piano libraries. So this is about 30 gigs of different pianos. So you'll have a Yamaha C7, a Model D, which is probably a Steinway, Bosendorfer, an upright piano, and a CP80, all sampled without any sample loops. All pretty amazing for what you could do. So that's probably the piano I use a lot for my piano critical things, and that's just a separate purchase. And again, it's part of the Absolute 4 or the Absolute collection. So I think you get that piano, you won't be disappointed at all. So it's still a lot of people's favorite piano. Question: is it possible to have a free sample playback Hallian to make it easier for Hallian instrument developers to convince customers to buy their products? Free as in no required dongle as well. We currently do that. That's what Hallian Sonic SE3 is. So for our Hallian developers, That comes, one is it comes with every version of Cubase, so that the samples created in Halion can play back, but it's also people doing that can have a free download, and it works off of a soft E licenser, so there's no required dongle. So that's what many of the sample developers are currently doing, is they just, release their libraries and then they link to the free Halion Sonic SE3. So, and it's worked out really well for a lot of people. So that's already happening. All right. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so we have a question. Is it possible to convert a MIDI from an instrument track into audio? Pro Tools has a feature to drop and drag with a quick render. Is there a fast feature like this in Cubase? So, really all you have to do is, just take this piano part here. So let's go ahead and solo this piano. So, Cubase has a render in place. So I'll just take this, go to my edit menu, and then you could just choose to render in place. You can go to your render settings. You could choose to include effects or not. And you could choose to mute or get rid of the track. So just a couple of seconds, we could take the whole piano part, and then it's just going to be rendered directly right there. So that's where our rendered audio is. So just go to your edit to render in place, and then you could just, in a matter of seconds, just have your MIDI from an instrument track rendered as audio. You could have that automatically disable the track, mute the track, remove the piano, remove the MIDI information if you want. So, okay, so we have, all right, so question, Cubase 10.51 cannot group a video with its audio. Can't figure it out. Why? So let's try a new project here. Okay, so here I have my the video and its extracted audio. So what I could do, I'm just going to hit Command G or Control G. And now those two will just be linked. So they'll always be kind of tied to each other. So make sure that you select both of the tracks and hit Control or Command G, and that will group it. And to ungroup it, you could hit Command or Control U, and then each element can move independently. But again, Command or Control plus G. And then as you move, once those are linked, so we see that they're linked, and now as one is moved, they'll both be tied together. So give that a shot, and I think that will do the trick for you. Okay, so question, what's the best way to record MIDI or audio, and what are the advantages of disadvantages of using either? So if you're recording MIDI, you don't record the actual sound. So you record that you pressed keys on a MIDI keyboard this hard for this long, and you released the key. So you could plug it in as a piano and then play it back as different sounds. So that gives you a lot of flexibility. And, if you have a MIDI part, you have a tremendous amount of editing capabilities. So at this point, let's say if we add a MIDI track, and if we are here and let's say, we have long notes here and we just hit our finger wrong. With MIDI, we could just, erase individual components. Whereas audio, you can't record a bass part and then have it easily play back a saxophone part, but you can't really record your vocal as MIDI. So like for guitar parts and for vocals, that would obviously, be digitized as audio. So they're kind of two different things. They often can be tied together, but if you're recording real instruments, that's going to be audio. Recording your guitar, recording like a live drums, acoustic drums, you could do that as well. So that's when you'd want to use audio, and for virtual instruments and synthesizers, that's when you'd probably want to record MIDI. Okay, so question, if we are not using a VSTi device, can we erase it? So let's say if I have, so if I add a track instrument, let's say a retrolog, and let's say if I have an instrument track, or an instrument rack, so let's say a pad shop, I could come here and we'll create that. So if I wanted to get rid of the instrument track, I could just right click and remove selected tracks. And that unloads it directly from the particular instrument. And if I wanted to come here, if I remove the selected track from pad shop, the instrument, that's just a MIDI track that was being routed. But if it's an instrument rack, you could just choose no VST instruments, and that will unload it for you. Okay, so a question, you show in this Hangout the Beat Agent and Groove Agent SE. I wonder how to save after you have modified samples and how to cancel and start over again. So okay, so let's say if I was building up my samples here. Hang on one second, my son's knocking on the door. Okay, sorry about that. I'm back. Okay, so with building up our agents here, if you wanted to kind of start over and redo it. So I wonder how to save after you've modified samples and how to cancel and start over again. So if we wanted to, let's say here I have multiple kick drums. So what I want to do is just take, these samples here. I'll drag it onto a pad. So here I have 3 samples. And I could choose to just layer those particular samples. And if you wanted to choose to be a little like more accurate with start for each layer, you could just kind of come here and choose, different start times. So now as you do this, and let's say snare top and bottom. I come here, drag these to my snare. We could do round robins or layers. So again, I'll just come here. And once we, if I wanted to, start over on a pad, so let's say I hated everything I did with the snare, at that point I could just right click and choose cut pad. And that way this will kind of, be all set. You'll have different options if you wanted to undo your last move as well. So if you wanted to build up, and once you're ready to save, just select the agent, right click, and you could export the kit with samples, and you could save it anywhere you want, and then be able to open it up into any further project. So and then if you wanted to tweak it, where you say, okay, I want to take this and adjust the volume up and maybe the tuning, you could just save that as a different kit as well to have different variations. So hopefully that helps. But just kind of drag and drop, and then start making your own kits. And you could have a lot of flexibility, especially if you wanted to take existing recordings. Groove Agent's wonderful for taking an existing recording and being able to make kits out of that. Okay, so we have a question. Can you explain the snap options, grid, bars, events, etc., and when it's useful to switch between them? Maybe an example when to utilize them. Okay, so let's take a look. Let me just jump to maybe a different project here. Okay, so we have different snap options. So as we move events, let me just make this a little more obvious, a little easier to see. So let's say I have this particular event here. So if we wanted to turn snap on and off, that's the letter J. So now if I want it to be free, I disable snap, I can move any event freely anywhere that I want. If I have snap turned on, it's going to snap. Currently I have it set to grid. So this would be the musical grid. So right now this is measure 31 and I have it set to beat. So we can see kind of subdivision. So I can say, now I could only move this event on the bar. So I can only move it to measure 31 or measure 32, 33. If I have this set to beat, I can move it to beats 1, 2, 3, 4. And it will snap only to those particular events. So if I was editing something musically, that may make sense. There's also where I could have a separate one as quantized. So if I wanted to, have it I want to snap it to half note triplets, we could do that as well. So this way we could snap based on that or based on zoom. So if I'm zoomed in, we could have higher degrees of snapping. And if I was kind of zoomed out, the snap would automatically just adjust to like half notes at this resolution. So if I wanted to actually move different events, not based on the grid, but we could also have grid relative. So let's say my event here is slightly ahead of the beat. So when I come here, I think if we move it to grid relative, and I'm going to put it on bar, I can move it one bar, but still that amount earlier than the beat. So grid would move it directly to the next like measure. But with this turned off in grid relative, what grid relative will allow you to do is to, as we move it, it'll move it one bar, but still that relative offset from the grid. So that's what grid relative is. So if you know that this is always going to be, like an anticipatory musical thing, like ahead of the beat, you could just still keep that position within the grid. We also have events. So if I wanted to move this event and have it snap directly to the grid of, the event here. So that could be the basis. The ending or beginning of the next event could be the basis for snapping. So that's what the events would do. Now, when we go to shuffle, at this point, I could just take, let me colorize this one slightly differently so it's a little easier to distinguish. So as soon as I have this blue part, if I wanted these to kind of flip around, I could just drag that over, and that would move this one over to the left and move the other one over to the right. So if I wanted to swap the position of these two, that's when I would use shuffle and just kind of drag it over, and that would switch the position of the two different events. And the last one we're going to have is based on cursor. So now this will automatically, have move the events directly to the cursor. So wherever my cursor is at, I could just have that follow. So that gives you kind of an idea of some of the different grid options that you could have and when you may want to switch between them. All right, so we have Smita from Yamaha Music India. Great to see you on a Hangout. Okay, so hi guys, is there a way to use the range tool to select a selection to automate punch in and punch out, maybe a macro to set the points, record enable, punch in, punch out, or loop record? So if you wanted to do just one preference that could be really helpful is when you go to your preferences and just go to editing, is where there's an option for cycle follows range selection, because your punch in and punch out will automatically be based on the left and right locator. So now anytime that I want to come here, and I select an area with my range tool, the left and right locators will automatically be turned on. So if I wanted to just punch in on this word, I could select it with the range, and at that particular, if I wanted that phrase, then just hit IO, and then at that point it would just automatically play. And just as we're doing this, now the eye is turned on, it's going to punch in on the selected track. So if I wanted to say, okay, let's punch in on this track just for this particular, so I'm going to select that track, come right over here, and now as we punch in, so you could just set your locators to follow the range and just kind of leave your punch in and punch out. There's also where you could have punch points. So, if you go to transport, you could set up a macro to do this as well. So you'll see punch points, and you could say set punch points to the locator selection. So if you wanted to have like a little bit of pre-record and post-record, at this point, they'll just set this to, to like, let's say stereo in. So at that point, you could just have the punch in. that would be independent from the left and right locators. But again, probably the preference that would make most sense to streamline that is under editing, cycle follows range selection, because that's what the punch in and punch out are kind of based on, the left and right locators by default. All right, good to see Pablo in here, joining the Hangout. Okay, question, is there a way to have auto punch in and punch out send a MIDI command for each in and out outside of Cubase? This would allow patch changes automatically on a Midas M32 for one-to-one patching. I'm not sure if there's a way that the Midas would actually respond to it. Sometimes there's some hardware that can take the transport commands and then, use it for GPIO. So you could have like a record enable light. But I'm not sure. You may have to create a macro, but if you wanted to have patch changes, there isn't a way. I don't know. In Cubase, you may be able to make a macro to send, record out and send program change. But I'm not sure if you may want to do that, but I'm not sure. Like, if with the Midas, if why you didn't have one-to-one patching kind of set up to start with. But you could send a program change, to the event, or have a program change embedded in a track that would get sent every time, but it's not necessarily going to be fired off by the record and punch in and punch out commands. But maybe if you give me some more information why maybe you don't have that, why you need the patch change to be initiated from the punch, that could be helpful. All right, great to see Ambient Dave from Hampshire. All right. Okay, just reading through comments here. Thanks for all the great comments. So question, hi Greg, is there a way to create multiple audio tracks and have the inputs cascade? So the first track, sorry about the big plosive. So the first track is the selected input. Second track is the next available input. Thanks. So let's give it a shot. I'm going to make sure I go to my audio connections here. Let me just switch to... I'll just do a new project here. So let's say if I have 16 mono inputs. Okay, so let's say if I add 16 and see if I can do this. Okay, so I don't know if you can add it that way, but if you wanted to select these. So if I have these all going, and I have 16 mono ins, if I hold down Shift, at that point, let me see if I do it in the full mixer, or if I did it, I'll try it one more time here. So I think the modifier key would be try it in a full mixer. So I'm going to try switching the first one while holding down Shift. Because I know it's like if I do... Yeah, Shift will do the outputs. I try a different modifier key. Well, I think Shift would do the outputs, but I thought it would do the inputs as well. It could be that maybe I don't have any of them connected. Let me connect. I thought it was a Shift key, but I'll play around with it and see if I could figure out if there's a modifier key to do that. But I know the outputs, they could do that. So I know they usually kind of, I've set it up for recording like large concerts and stuff before, and it seemed to work, but I'll play around with it a little more. Okay, so question, version 10.5 freezes and makes a terrible buzz during playback of large files. 32 gigabytes of RAM, and Pro 970 Samsung SSD, and a performance setting. So Pro Samsung SSD are the performance setting that can improve the issue. Make sure that, with audio performance, the first thing you do is go to your studio setup under your studio menu. And select your interface and go to the control panel and try to increase the buffer size. And this may be represented differently for different audio interfaces, but try raising the buffer size, and that should help if you haven't done that already. Okay. All right, so you see Jazz Dude's on a Hangout. So he's always helpful with so many different comments, helping people as I try valiantly to catch up. So I see a question from Millard Brown. Greg, is Quattrofuzz related to the Craig Anderton PAIA hardware unit from a zillion years ago? Yeah, that's actually, we modeled that originally as kind of a fun project in hardware, and then we sent it to Craig for his approval. He loved it, and I think he was surprised that we did it, and we were totally above the board, and I think paid him a royalty. So so it's based on that Quattrofuzz circuit. So, and then it was obviously kind of improved with Quattrofuzz 2 and added a lot more features. All right, so we have someone checking in from El Salvador. It's great. Okay, so this is move on. All right. All right, so we have people from Cyprus. Okay, Macedonia. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. Old composer, instrumentalist here from Vermont, still using Cubase 6.5. Have we transcended beyond musical here with all these parameters and architecture, or am I finding it redundant chasing all this technology? I think that there's, I always tell people, programs like Cubase could be like a tool, and it's really how you use it. It's like, if you have a hammer, you could build a beautiful, enclosure or something beautiful in your studio, or you could put a big hole in the wall. It's just really what how you want to use it. But I think that the benefits of workflow with later versions, and realize that, when we do Cubase, it's going to be for people who are recording rock bands, people who are doing hip hop, people doing EDM, film composers, wide variety of users. And sometimes, there's different things that can really help out one, workflow that you think may not be as applicable to what you're doing, can still make a big difference. And sometimes figuring out how to apply different things. And, you could treat things the same way as you do in 6.5 as you do in 10.5. But, once you get into, okay, I want to take a portion of this as a composer and be able to export this with the video just for this portion of the video, being able to have, better instruments like Pad Shop, being able to have, more control for your VST instruments, being able to, undo different instrument parameters or mix parameters or saving snapshots or exporting. All those things can really help you with that and just getting your workflow done. So, you could treat it any way you want. So even though, new features can seem overwhelming, you realize that, you could still work this, a lot of the same concepts from Cubase for Atari are still applicable in Cubase 10.5, 31 years later. So. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Greetings from Montenegro. What would be your approach for making ENIGMA Enigma type of drums? Would it be with existing loops, and how would you combine them if you were to make your own? I'm not familiar with Enigma type of drums. If you want to send me, maybe if you get a chance to maybe describe those type of drums, I'm sorry for my ignorance, or send me like a link to Club Cubase at steinberg.de with an example. I could probably tell you how to, accomplish that in Cubase, but I'm sorry for my ignorance. Question. Hi, Greg. Do you produce music of your own? I used to do a lot of studio stuff and a lot of productions, doing different bands and stuff like that. I haven't, I moved into a new house right around the first of the year, and, I finally have kind of, after moving a bunch of stuff, moving my studio and getting it reorganized, I finally have it kind of set up in a house where I'm living for the first time in about 10 years. I haven't done a lot of projects recently, but I should do more. I've actually done some stuff with my son. He started writing some songs when he was 5, but it's kind of fun. But I'll occasionally dabble in some projects, but, life has been busy since, getting married and having kids, and, so I haven't done my own projects in a long time, so it's kind of a shame. But, I have a cool studio set up now, so hopefully, get some stuff going. So, okay. Okay, just going through different comments. Okay, just going through. Okay, my timeline jumps. So let me just navigate back. Sorry about that. Sorry, just navigating back to where I was. Okay, so so question, you show in the Hangout a lot of tricks with VariAudio. Is there any trick to add vibrato? It is often vibratos that lack in amateur singers. Nothing necessarily within VariAudio. I know some people that will use, the vibrato plugin. So if you come over here, there are some of the plugins that people will use. But generally, I haven't really, I've done a lot of vocal editing in my day, and I've never really had to add vibrato to anyone, but I've had to take it out a lot. One of the singers in my bands in college, used to always, she was always the person, that had that Broadway vibrato in every song she sang, whether it was appropriate or not, and we used to kind of, tease her about it, and she just couldn't turn it off. But she ended up being Miss Saigon on Broadway for a while, so she did okay as a result of it. So but there, people, I've seen people add vibrato, but there's nothing really in VariAudio to add vibrato necessarily. Okay, so just seeing some comments on like the east-west. So I have this issue. It's not east-west. It's when it's like the audio drops out. Let me just see if I could circle back to find that. Okay, it says clicking in the name area of the track and record or playing back. It's like audio drops. So, I haven't run into that, but maybe if anyone else could comment, I know that we may see it in the discussion as we approach it. Okay. So hi, Greg. Greetings from London. Thanks. Greetings to you as well. Beautiful city. Just wondering how you would mix. Is it better to use the mixer on the interface going in and then do some subtle tweaking in the Cubase mixer, or vice versa? I try to record, and I'm probably, I may be traditionally old school, but, I will try to record in as dry as possible. I will use compression only if really needed. And, I never liked the sound of compression. So like I'm a bassist. And I never, when I was doing a lot of studio work, I didn't like the sound of compression on my bass so much. So I would make sure that I would play for the engineer where they wouldn't have to put compression on it as a default. So I try to do that as much as possible. I think some of the, some of the interfaces like our UR series have built-in DSP. So I think sometimes, printing a little bit of EQ is fine if it's not too drastic. So I do that, but I would tend to lean on, mixing in the box, but making sure that what I have captured isn't problematic. If it's going to be problematic where it's just like, this is the only guitar or guitar amp and it's just not working, you have to do something radical to capture it decently, then I would do it. But I would try to err on the side of doing more of the tweaks in the Cubase mixer because you have a lot of control over that. Okay. Okay, question. Why does hitting stop when in record cause a pretty massive drop or blast to the monitors or headphones? Only have this issue in Cubase. Same setup in PT doesn't happen. So I've never had that. I would check to see if one, if it's being caused by a lot of plugins. I know a lot of people will tend to use a lot of heavy plugins in the master fader. So if you're doing that, where that could be adding latency and it's, plugins are doing look ahead processing, you could do that. So if you're running plugins on your master bus as you're tracking, I would try to avoid that and see if that makes a difference. But I don't think that's pretty normal behavior. So, but see if you're, maybe David, if you could, let us know if you're using a lot of different plugins on the master bus, or if you're have a lot of different processing going on, or if you're printing pretty clean. But I would say if you're doing that, and depending on the plugins, that could cause some of the issues that maybe you're describing. Okay. Okay, is it possible to record audio live while in loop and have each pass create a new track while the previous passes continue to be heard? All right, so let's close this out. All right, so I think if we just put this into like a cycle record mode, we could, you could do a keep history. And if we do this, then it's, let's say if I come here, so let's say if I just kind of punch in here, and as soon as it does the next pass, it would monitor the currently active one. So you're not going to hear the other one. What I've seen some people do that want that to occur is just to add multiple tracks. And let's say if you're recording here, and you could set up a preference for project and mix console to enable record on selected audio track. So I know some people, if you want to do that, it work this way, where they're recording, they get to the end of the pass and go to the next track. Select it here. All right, and now select this one. And that way you could monitor the previous track while you're doing it. But I think in most traditional recording scenarios that you monitor the track that you're actually recording as opposed to doing that. So if you wanted to monitor and listen to the other tracks, you'd probably have to do a scenario like that. Okay, so let's say a question, can you show us how to time stretch a vocal sample? There's a couple ways of doing it. Probably the easiest way is to, let's say if I wanted to take this particular phrase, there's different modes that you can have. So let's say if I want to make this note longer here, you could actually put the object selection tool into sizing applies time stretch and then just drag it out to however you want. And you could take your snap off. So you say, I want this to fit into that amount of time or into this amount of time, and you could just stretch it just like that. And so that's probably the easiest way to do time stretching for a vocal, so you could see the visual correlation to the timeline. Okay, just reading through comments. And some more discussion on the drums that I was ignorant of. So, all right. So we have Mark saying, I know we had his question earlier, but aloha from Honolulu. It's a beautiful place. Got to go to the Hawaiian Grammy Awards about 10 years ago. It was wonderful. Okay. So, okay, just reading through. Okay, so see a comment on score editor. It'd be great if the score editor, we adjust your score in real time. Currently, all the settings in the score editor layout staff require pressing apply to see the changes. So let's take a look at that. So if I wanted to, so let's say just come over here. If I wanted to change the key, we could see where, you could change where you do have to hit apply. So I'll pass that on as a feature request. But I don't think it's too hateful to have to hit apply to change within the score editor, but I can see where maybe that could slow you down. Question, when file sharing, is there a possibility of copyright ownership? I'm not a copyright expert, but I would always just, before sharing anything, make sure that it says copyright in your name just to protect yourself, and, send it. If you're sharing it, if you're sharing a link, put the copyright information in every stage of communication, just so you have a paper trail. Okay. So see, hi Greg, waited 3 hangouts to have you answer a question from David Rogers. Sorry if I missed your question. I try to catch them. Sometimes I lose some of the hangouts. I'm just circling back to see if I missed your question. So maybe David Rogers, if you want to, sorry if I missed your question. It's not intentional by any means, but if you could just maybe ask the question again, I'll see if I could take a look later in Hangout and see if I can get to it. So you just ask your question again. Sorry if I've missed it. Okay, so see question how to bounce 4 lines into 1 line. All right, so say if I wanted to bounce 4 lines or 4 audio files, I guess, down to 1 audio file. So let's say if I want to take these and bounce it down to 1 audio file, I'll just split that. So this will be 5, but what I could do is just go to render in place. Let me activate this project. And go to render settings, and then we could choose to mix down to 1 audio file. So at this point, I'll take these 5 files, we'll just render in place, and now it's been bounced down to 1 file for us with all of those drum sources there that have been subsequently muted as a result of the render settings that I had. Okay, hello, Greg from North Carolina. Best way to export stems from Cubase 10.5 to a mixing engineer who's using another DAW. So, the easiest way is just using your file export audio mixdown and doing a batch export. So let's say if I wanted to hand these files off, and these are all mono files. And I know a lot of people sometimes have problems because when they do a export audio mixdown that it will do stereo files. And that's good if you have, different effects and stuff that could be incorporated. If not, what we could do is if you go to your VST connections. So if I wanted to take this project where everything is starting and I wanted to make it just Homer Simpson easy for someone to mix it in another program, I could give a combination of mono and stereo files. I'm just going to create a mono output. I will go to my routing here, select all the channels, and then I'm going to route these all to a mono out just by holding down Alt Shift. So I'm going to just confirm. So now all these channels are routed to mono out, and I will come here. I'll just do a small portion of this just to save time. So let's say you set your left and right locators around the beginning and end of the song. You could hit Control or Command A and then the letter P, and that will set the left and right locators around all the selected parts. We will come over here, go to Export, Audio Mixdown, and we'll choose multiple. So I'll say I want to output all of my audio channels, and I want this to create a new project. You can give it names, different naming conventions, and we'll choose Export Audio. And this will take between our left and right locators. And now it's made equal length audio files of all of the different sources. So that way that person could just load it in, start every file. It will include a timestamp. So if a file is here, you could do something like I wanted to now just come here and I'll just choose to move that file to origin, and that would automatically have the timestamp in for you. So try just going again to your file, to export audio mixdown, choose multiple. Let's activate this. And if you want it to be mono and stereo, send your mono tracks to mono output, your stereo tracks to a stereo out. And then you could just create a new project, and that will move everything to a new folder for you and create a new project of stems. So that's the easiest way to make sure all your files are going to be in line without chance of getting messed up. And tell the air guy to get Cubase or Nuendo. So, okay. Okay, it says I set up a track to loop to practice, and now I can't undo the loop. Used the 16 automation pull down help. So if you have just a loop, so let's say, this is just looping over and over again, you could hit the loop icon here directly on the transport. So, and that should be able to just undo the loop. Depending on your preferences, you could also just click here in the loop to disable the loop. And then it'll just, as soon as it gets, past this point, instead of looping, when we see it gray, it'll just continue on. So we see it just continuing past the loop point. But if it was here and my loop point was blue, it'll now just cycle back to the beginning. So you could deactivate it by clicking there, and there's a preference to disable that, or just on a transport. And if you don't see that on a transport, just, you can probably just see it here, that icon, and that's the loop or cycle. Okay, question. How to ensure my left and right channels are balanced, have the same closest possible loudness, LFSU, other metrics in mixdown, or an audio channel. Checking out your meters is definitely, like a really important part. So when you go to your meter options here, being able to just revert this project here quickly. You can come over here and check your metering here, and you could also go to your loudness, and this will give you some better indication of your range. Now, if you've done something, let's say we want to do a mix down of our file, another method that you could use, let's say I want to do an export audio mix down, we'll just do our stereo out, and we will create an audio track in our project. So now we're doing a mix down. It's going to be put directly in our project. And then you could go to your, select that file here. So here's our mix down file. And what you could do is go to your audio menu to statistics. And that will do an analysis of that particular file and tell you a lot of information about, the left and right channels, their levels, their true peak, if you need DC offset, the bit depth, what's going on, an estimated pitch, your RMS, your loudness units. So do a quick mix down and then just do an analysis of it, again, by going audio to statistics. Okay, so question, why does my faders on the MIDI keyboard rule 2 channels at the same time? It could be depending on, I'm not sure if you have it set up. So let's say if you have it set up going through like a generic remote, but make sure that when you have, like if you have VST quick controls, or if you have it set up, it could be that maybe you have two of, VST quick controls or track controls. Often maybe two of the faders are transmitting the same MIDI CC message. So it could be something like that, or your fader is set up to, and it could also be that, two channels are linked. So let's say if we have our overhead channel and this channel, and we have these in a link, that, moving one would move two of them together. So those are two things to kind of look for, to see if that's happening. That's what could cause that. Okay, so okay, I upgraded from 10 to 10.5 and I only did the upgrade setup. I'm having a lot of problems with the new one. How can I get and install the full version? If you go to just your Steinberg download manager, or the Steinberg download assistant, rather. So once we have this going, just go to Cubase. So let's say you go to Cubase Pro 10.5. You'll see the full installation here. You'll see the README. You can see the update from 10. The update, 10.52 from 10.5. So you could just, from the Steinberg download assistant, just get the full version if you want to download that. Okay, I have a question. I'm trying to align 5 background vocals I did. They are not in time. What's the best way to align them and how to do it? So since version 10, Cubase Pros had this audio alignment functionality that works really well. Let's take a look at it. Okay, so let's look at our background vocals here.
Somos iguales. Somos iguales.
So what we could do, you'll see this audio alignment here. And I think it's also from the audio menu. You could just see, different alignment functionalities. But I'm going to open up my audio alignment panel, and we have reference and targets. So I'll select this as a reference, and then I want to select the other files as targets. And then I will just choose to align audio. And now that we listen to it,
Somos iguales. Somos iguales.
that way you could just kind of have background vocals tightened up really easy without spending a lot of time editing. So try just the built-in audio alignment, and I think that should do the trick for you. Okay, let's come over here. At Cubase, I have a chord pad and assigned input of a MIDI track to chord pads. When I activate step record, it doesn't record playing chords. Is it possible, or do I need to hit record and record chords in real time? I'm not sure if it works with the step entry. Because I think the step entry may be just looking straight for like from a MIDI input, but let's give it a shot. Okay, so let's... Okay, so I'll set the MIDI input here from chord pads. Okay, so I will close this out. Okay, so if I put in okay, so it looks like it may not step input may not work with the chord pad, so you may just have to record it in. But I'll pass that along, see if it's something that maybe could be looked at. Okay, so let's just go through. Okay, so I see, Greg, you misunderstood my question last week. When I import a mono stem in Nuendo, I need the insert effects to become stereo. Think of an electric guitar DI stem into an amp simulator with stereo effects like reverb and ping pong delay. So currently it's going to work in that, so if we have our mono source and we put an insert effect on it, that it will maintain, the inserts will maintain that. So I understand where that may not make sense for that, but you may want to run the, if you wanted to, we could just select a particular track. If it's a mono track, add, I know this is a workaround, but add a group channel. So, and we'll have this as stereo. So this particular audio track is now going to the group, and then you could run your stereo effects, like if you want to do like a stereo delay, you could run that on the group channel and have that dedicated. So, we'll follow, where a mono track will have mono inserts, a stereo track will have stereo inserts. So, but if you have, for a lot of stuff, you may want to run it as just a effects end. Sometimes for guitar amps and within its own internal plugins, I understand where you'd want to maintain that as stereo. If you need that, then just simply route it to a group and route it to a stereo group and add the stereo insert there for your guitar plugin. So we got a question like how to make glide 808 in Cubase or Nuendo. So we'll show you how we could kind of do it using the sampler track. So let's come here, so we'll have this on our sampler track. Let's say we have so you probably want to make sure that it's in monophonic mode, and then you could just so without the glide function turned on and with the glide. So you could just kind of do it like that, and that's an easy way to do that. Okay. Hi, Greg. Can you reproduce when I draw automation to effect or group channels into subtracks? The color of the automation is the color that's set in the others in program settings, and the color that is. And not the color that is set in program settings. Okay, let me see if okay, so let me just see if I could recreate this here. Okay, so when I draw automation, let me add an effect send to these as well. Okay, so they all have effects in. So okay, so I'll just go ahead and draw in some automation here. Okay, so so when I draw automation to effect or group channels in the subtracks, the color of the automation is the color is set in others in the program settings, not the color that is set in the program settings. Okay, so let me see if I change the color for this particular part, if that changes it. So let's say I'll make this kind of a green. So now I have that as a green. I have that as kind of a purplish. So I'm not sure if I understand set in others in program settings. Let me just see if that's maybe one of the preferences and user interface. So I'm sorry, I'm not sure if maybe if you could reiterate. So the color automation is a color that is set in others in the program settings and not the color that's set in the program settings. So if you could, maybe if you could re-clarify that so I could understand it better. Sorry if I'm being kind of slow about that. So, but maybe if you could reiterate the question and see if what I was doing was different or totally off. Okay, reading through different comments. Thanks for all the great questions. If you've learned something new, please feel free to give a thumbs up and to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet. So question, is it possible to feed a plug-in EQ into the side chain of a hardware compressor in Cubase? I'm not sure if we could do side chaining and hardware compressing, but let's check it out. So if we go to my audio connections, let's say I have external effects. So let's say, okay, we got a DBX, we'll say we're using. Okay, so I'll come here, go to the inserts. Yes, I don't think you're going to be able to sidechain internally to external processors. I haven't found a way of doing it. So, but if you, let's say, I'm just seeing if I'm, so is it possible to feed a plug-in EQ into the side chain of a hardware compressor in Cubase? I mean, you could, you know, maybe if you had a dedicated group track. So let's say if I go to this group track here, and this group track has the compressor on it. I don't have a way of trying this easily. So let's say if we have the frequency EQ on the group, that we could send this group to a particular output, and that output may be able to feed the hardware compressor just as the output. So you could probably do it like that. So again, set up a group and have the EQ on a group and route that group to the particular output that feeds the compressor. I think that will work. So, but if you're using the compressor as an external processor and external effects in Cubase, I don't think it would. Okay, so just see a comment or a question, how to defeat loop function in automation. So, you know, if you have automation going on, let's say if I'm here and I go to my fader, I'm automating. So let's say if I'm automating away and we get to the end of our point, and right now I have this turned on, my cycle, so it's going to loop. So I think if I'm understanding correctly, if I just turn that off and let's say I go to channel 2, that it'll just continue to automate without any effect of the cycle. So but maybe I'm not understanding correctly. But let me know if that's what you want to do or not. Okay, question. Is the original audio event saved in the pool when it is replaced by bounce in place? Yes, it's going to be saved. The new file will be there. It'll be a unused file. So let's come over here. So I have an audio file here. We go to the pool window. Look at our audio files. Now I will come over here to audio, and then we'll just choose to bounce selection. Okay, so now we've bounced the selection. If I did it right, we go to our pool window. We see 2 audio files. But if now at this point I could say remove unused media, and the original file will be removed as it's being referenced by the pool. But the original file is still in the pool. Because it's still being referenced within the project unless you tell it not to. Okay, so I see Kyle, who gave some more information, says on his auto punch in, punch out, sending MIDI messages. I want to use auto punch in and punch out MIDI to OSC for library routing changes to the Midas M32. So I don't know if there's a way for it to be sent as a command through OSC. I don't use OSC personally, so. But I think it's just going to be sending a punch in, punch out command, and it's not going to necessarily send a whole string of MIDI messages. Good to see Steve McRae on the Hangout. Glad that you're learning a lot. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Displaying maker as music is playing may suggest a way to display markers, description in large font as song is playing, similar to studio. More options, time display. Thank you very much. So the markers are still could be kind of a small font to display. But if we wanted to come here, let's say a marker track. So let's say if I come here, we'll just add some different markers. So if you want to see more, bigger descriptions. So let's say, if we have this as, our song structure. So let's say intro, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse 2, chorus 2. All right, so we can see these, and these could take more information as you do that. I know some people will use an arranger track if they want to see it bigger, or even just a blank, instrument track. So I know some people will come here and as we go to label, that may be about the same size, but let's say if I come here and an arranger event, that when we go to edit this, so they could all probably be a little larger for the Mr. Magoo users like myself with bad vision. So if I come here, so, those are some different ways of doing it, but I can see where it could be useful to have, those be a little bigger. Okay, question, Greg. How do I lock Track Inspector to always show all menu items? It always seems to change on me by itself. I think it could be depending on the project itself. So if you want it to show all, you could do that. So if if you do this and save it as a template, let's come here, add an audio track, and I will show all, and I'll save this as a template. So let's say I do a new project, and I add an audio track, and let's add a MIDI track. So it looks like that was preserved. Let's add a MIDI track and see. Looks like that is preserved without having to do a template. So, but try saving a template and see if that makes a difference if you're kind of starting from a known entity. Okay, so it's just see question. I need to have markers to show in XML file. It seems when I export to score with marker from marker track, the exported file does not contain the markers. So let's give that a try just real quick. But I don't think that is carried over. But let's see if I take my piano part here. Yeah, so I don't think since the score editor, if I'm not mistaken, can't display the markers, that it's not going to be included within the it's not going to be included with the exported music XML file. So okay, just reading through comments. Cubase currently only we can choose a single pattern for a player. Is there a plan to store patterns, say as P1, P2, P3, and trigger them in when needed? So I'm not sure if this is in the chord pads. I think the chord pads only have, I think the chord pads could have like two different players, but I'm not sure if it's the pattern is for where the pattern is for in your question, if it's in Groove Agent or the chord pads. So maybe if you could specify when you say single pattern for a player. So if you could specify, where the pattern is from, what part of the program, that would be helpful. Sorry. So let's see. At Cubase, does Steinberg has any plans to implement a ticket-based customer support, as with Make Music, East West, Dell, Canvas, etc.? Different distributors will have different support mechanisms. So I know the ones that we have in Germany that handle, I think, support in Europe, it's a different system than what we have in the US. And I think Japan is different. So depending upon the distributor, they will have different support mechanisms. So I'm not sure where you're based out of, but it's really kind of up to, for many of the territories and many parts of the world, it's up to the local distributor how support is handled. And they obviously, those, distributors will get support from Steinberg as well. But so it could depend on where you're based. Okay. So is it possible to have Cubase move trim notes with swipe left right on Mac mouse, or shift plus mouse wheel? Suppose general mouse with mouse wheel. So let's say if I want to double click here. So, if you wanted to trim notes, you could select these, and you could do a lot with the info line. So if you just wanted to choose to come over here, if you wanted to just, adjust the length. Let me just make sure I have snap disabled. So as I come here, we just... you could just kind of generally use kind of like the start and end position here. So using the mouse scroll wheel. So if you wanted to change that, make that event longer or shorter, you could do it, by, or if you want to change the length of particular notes. So you could do a lot of this stuff using kind of the mouse scroll wheel. So you may want to check that out as well. You could also just kind of resize particular notes as well. So as soon as you're here, just holding down the left and right mouse button, but play around with like the info line, and then you could adjust kind of with the mouse positions. Okay, see, thumbs up if you love Greg and appreciate his hard work in these hangouts. From Ambient Dave, thanks, appreciate it. Hope it's helpful and people are learning something. Okay, so question, how can I do a tape stop effect without using Loop Mash FX? Sorry, my timeline just jumped way ahead. Okay, how can I do a tape stop effect without using Loop Mash FX? I used to be able to do it in main screen by audio processing pitch without time correction in Cubase 7. Now I'm on 10.5. So let's go ahead and set up a new project. Okay, so I'll just come here. We just select arrange. All right, so let's see if we just come here. So I think it kind of works the same way. You just do it through. So if you just go to audio to processes, and you could just choose pitch shift. So as soon as you come here, and then just disable time correction there. So I think it kind of works the same way. So if you want to do more extreme stuff, you can just. So. But same way, basically, as you would in 7. So it's just kind of done in the direct offline processing. Question, is it possible to do audio alignment of different lengths? Generally they should be kind of in the same ballpark, ideally. For best and more predictable results. So, but, if they're not the same lengths, you may want to edit and just, cut, the start or end of different sections. But yeah, it's best, it's ideal to have it with, the same basic lengths. Okay. See a lot of thumbs up. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Okay. What is the fastest way to create a glissando ramp of notes in a given scale? Say Phrygian. Okay. So if I wanted to come here, let's just add MIDI track. All right, so I'll grab just my paintbrush tool and I'll just randomly paint notes in. So let's say just something horrible like that. All right, and I want these notes here to automatically conform, let's say, to a D Phrygian scale. So if you go to your logical editor, at this point, we could say we want to transform notes, type is equal to notes, and we want let's say value 1 transpose to scale. So I want it to be to D Phrygian. Okay. So now as I hit apply, that will just take all those notes. So we undo. So that's probably the fastest, easiest way to make that automatically work for you. So then, so if you want it to be to G Phrygian, it'll just automatically transpose just like that. Okay, curious if there's a way for Cubase to identify different hardware device attached and list their patches by name. Read my roll-in system 8 and select bank 1 patch 3 and name Cool Bass. So it could be set up, but it's not going to automatically extract because most hardware keyboards aren't quite capable of doing that. Hopefully with parts of MIDI 2.0, that will be better. But if you have let's say you have like a classic, like a Roland, you could come over here, go to, if you go to your studio menu to more options, you have a MIDI device manager. So here you could install devices and there's a number of devices. So let's say, okay, like I want to use my JV 1080. You could define what MIDI port it's connected to in your setup. Then when we go to add a MIDI track, I'll come over here. We'll just call it JD or JV 1080. And you can make your own patch scripts for this. And then when you actually go to, say, we want this to be going out to our JV 1080. And now where you see off here, you could just see all of your different program banks, and that will send the appropriate bank and program change information for your device. Okay, question. VST Connect Performer does not recognize Zoom HN4 in Windows 8.1. Am I doing something wrong? I'm not sure if VST Connect is designed for Windows 8.1, but make sure that you have the ASIO driver for the Zoom unit connected and not the typical Windows multimedia driver or the Windows, sound driver, but make sure that you have the ASIO driver installed for the system. So, and if it sees the ASIO driver, then, it should be able to see, but you probably have to install that separately. And it's not just like an operating system driver. So I would try that. Okay, question. Hello, how can I connect to my audio interface with Cubase? Which news does Cubase bring to us? So if you want to, so once you have your drivers installed for your audio interface, you could set it up by going to your studio menu to studio setup. You want to go to your VST audio system. And at this point, you'll see your ASIO driver. Select your audio interface there. And at that point, Cubase will be using that as your audio interface, and you can hit F4 or go to your audio connections under your studio menu and define your inputs and outputs that you're using and which connections, and then Cubase is able to see it. Okay, so let's just see, going through different comments here. Okay, just again reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions that people have had. Okay, so just read a comment. I have a bunch of external instruments tracks set up with my Army UFX. When I use the internal MacBook Pro sound card and I go back to my studio, all my external instruments are deconnected again, or can I fix it? Okay, so it looks like you have it connected to the Army. Use the internal. So I think if you're switching between your Army and your internal audio, at that point, if you're using the Army as your MIDI interface and Cubase doesn't see it, you're probably going to have to reestablish that MIDI connection, because Cubase is seeing that, that when it tried to reach out to your MIDI gear, that there's no path for it to get there because the MIDI interface wasn't installed on the system. So you probably have to just make the reconnections with that. Okay, so I see Ambient Dave is working on setting up some of his drum maps for his third-party Contact drum libraries. It's great. Once you have that done, your life will be so much better and organized, and you're not spending so much time guessing on what sound is what. Okay, hi. In 10.51, I automatically get a new Hallian virtual instrument track every time I drag in MIDI from a drum VST. How do I stop that and remove the Hallian track from the inspector? So once you come over here, go to your preferences and go to MIDI file. Excuse me. And you'll see destination. So here you want it to just be sent to MIDI tracks or instrument tracks. So as soon as you create that particular instrument, it'll load up probably a VST instrument track of Hallian Sonic. So all you have to do at that point is just come right over here. If you want to get rid of it, just choose no VST instrument, or you could just remove the selected tracks and that will remove it. But just set up your preferences under MIDI to MIDI file and then choose a different destination. Question, is there a way to change the MIDI key assignments of a pad in Groove Agent like MIDI Learn? So let's go ahead and load up an instance of Groove Agent. We'll show you how. So once you kind of come over here, you could, I think you click on this little icon here for use hardware control memory, and then you could right click and then edit learn trigger note. So click right here. This will be using the default. But as soon as you click on the little drum icon here, this is kind of intended to use with like electronic drum kits. Click there, and then you could right click, hit the note on your drum pad or controller, and that will capture the incoming MIDI note, just like a MIDI learn function like you asked. Okay, question. How do you set up Cubase to hear yourself through your monitors when using the microphone? So it's really just enabling monitoring. So, you know, when you have an audio track set up here, you could record enable the track. That tells that when you hit record, that this track will audio that's routed into this input will record when you hit record. So that track is armed. And to hear the track, you click on the monitor enable. Now there's some preferences. So if you wanted to go to your preferences to VST, so if, believe by default it's set to manual, where you have to manually enable the monitoring. But you could also try, you know, when record running, when record enabled, or tape machine style. I usually switch it to tape machine style. And then you'll be able to hear the microphone through your monitors as you're recording. Okay, so let's see. Just going through more comments, see all sorts of people helping each other out. That's always wonderful. So is there an easy way to duplicate a track at least twice or more times? So if I wanted to duplicate this particular track, let's see if it's just a keyboard shortcut that we could access to. So you could do it just from project menus, a keyboard shortcut. You could just right click and, you could do it one time at a time, but you could just come over here. You can make a macro out of it if you wanted to duplicate it multiple times. So you can assign a keyboard shortcut or make a macro to do it 2 or 3 times if you wanted to. Okay, so I see question, how do I add a VST folder path? I assume this is for like plugin folder paths. So if you go to your studio menu and go to your VST plugin manager, if you go to the lower left-hand corner, you could just click on this little settings cogwheel and then click on the plus sign and you could define your VST plugin paths there. So for your VST2 plugins. So once again, VST plugin manager, click on the little settings icon and then click on the plus sign. And then you could define the VST 2.x plugin paths. Okay, so just seeing a question. In the first half of this hangout, how did he have the marker track floating at top? And this is a function called divide track list. So I'll come here, I'll add a track. Let's add a marker track. I will move this to the top here and let's just go ahead and add markers here. And if I always want that to be at top, so when I scroll down, it doesn't disappear, we could click on this little icon here. It's very subtle, the divide track list. We can move that up top. And now I could scroll up and down here and keep tracks anchored directly at the top. Okay, just see. Reading through comments. Thanks for all the great discussion. I'm seeing maybe a comment on the divide track list. If maybe that was a new feature, I think it was in like maybe SX2 or so. So it's been there a while. So it's a new feature today. So think of it as Christmas in June 19th. Okay, just going through. Okay, so I see Greg, could you please pass on a request to toggle channel between mono stereo where insert effects could be an issue? I know I've passed it on many times and are very aware of it, so but I'll reiterate it again. Okay, so I think getting back to our duplicated tracks, I think maybe the question was, can it be done for 2 tracks at once? I believe so. So we just switch to our project here. So I'm going to select all my drum tracks here. And we'll just choose to duplicate tracks. And we can see the ones in white are the ones with the that have been duplicated. And we can see that indicated by the little D in the brackets there. Okay, question. Hi, Greg. How can I keep tempo and bar setting for dialogue audio channels for a movie at the same time, changing tempo and bars for composing for music? Is that possible? Thank you. Yeah, we could do that. We'll just open up a quick project here. Thanks for all the wonderful questions from everyone. All right, so I know some of you have seen the same video many times, but all right, so let's say I want this particular event. Let me just see if I have maybe like a cymbal sound. Okay, so a lot of times we have two different types of data or two different track time classifications. So we could see these as what we call linear mode. So two different time bases. We could think of musical mode, which is when we see the quarter note here, and linear mode, which is when it would be a clock. So let's say I have this and if you have dialogue that you want to always stay at the same time positions, let's see if I can find something maybe a little more musical. So let's say I want to put in something that will always be synced with this cloud. So I wanted to just put in a little percussion thing. So let me just... So let's see if I... All right, so let me adjust my controller up a couple octaves here. Okay, so if I wanted to just put in I'll just make this a little louder, just like one of those types of sounds, and I wanted this always tied to where the All right, so I recorded that particular note to match kind of the cloud. So we can hear this, and I'll just make it a little louder here so we can. Okay, so if I wanted to adjust the tempo, so totally cheesy. And if I wanted to adjust a tempo, but that is going to be tied directly to the musical cue, I would put this into linear mode. So now I'll come over here and adjust the tempo of the audio. So let's say I come here. Now my tempo is going to be slower. But that event is not going to change the position based on tempo because it's in linear mode. If I put this into linear mode, and as I played, you hear the whole kind of track is slower. Now that's going to be played back at the same bar and time. So if I change the tempo from there, so what you want to do is if you want your dialogue tracks and other stuff that's going to be kind of fixed and tied to particular visual elements, you'd want that into linear mode. If you want to have tracks that are going to change tempo or want to follow tempo changes, you want them in musical mode. So that's kind of the two big distinctions there. So, put your dialogue and other audio channels that are kind of fixed. Maybe, if you have some, rough sound design, just put those into linear mode and put your music tracks into musical mode. Okay, it says, "Hi Greg, how can I use the logical editor to select all the MIDI tracks, not the MIDI parts, but the tracks?" I think we could use the project logical editor for that. So let me just do a new project and I'll have... And let's add some MIDI tracks. Let's add audio tracks. Let's add a sampler track or two. Let's add group tracks. Okay, so let's open up our project logical editor. So generally the logical editor itself, you can think of it just for, working on specific MIDI data. So here we'll choose to select container type is equal to, so say media type is equal to audio or... So you can see that has done all of the MIDI tracks and selected them. So, and if I wanted to be just audio tracks, I could come here and just say select every track that's an audio track. And then it won't select any of the MIDI tracks. So that way you could just kind of come over here and function, choose select, and then media type is equal to, and then you could choose the exact type of track that you want to select. Okay, so see people going for coffee. I'm jealous. All right. I'll get one after the hangout in a bit. So, all right, let's keep going through. Thanks for all the wonderful questions from everyone. Okay, so just going through different comments. All right, so someone from Greece checking in. All right, so it's sorry, my timeline jumped again. Sorry, let me just circle back to where I was. Okay. And just a question on the support tickets. It says in Holland and EU, we log into your My Steinberg account and you can do a support request form from there as well. I think that works internationally pretty well, but it could be different for some distributors. Okay. So, question: there used to be a patch script editor. Can we still download it from Steinberg, and does it still work? I think it was really, I think it was a utility called like Script Maker, I believe, and I think it worked on Windows 90. It was kind of written for Windows 95, Windows 98. You might still be able to find it on a download, but a lot of people just kind of end up using Excel and copying and doing it in Excel and find it pretty fast to do. So, and I think also like someone had just sent me a patch script. I think MIDI Quest can, like as a universal editor librarian, can still work and generate Cubase patch scripts, but there's a lot of them floating around online as well. Oh, so I'm saying, yeah, so the script maker, yeah, Jazz Dude was kind enough to post a link to it. Okay, just again reading through comments. Okay, so we have a question. Does Cubase connect to Dorico like it connects to Wavelab? There isn't a link between the two. So to get information from Dorico into Cubase, so a lot of people will copy and paste. Some people will, export MIDI files or music XMLs. I think now that, most of the, core features of Dorico and, the Dorico development team has been, incredibly prolific in doing what they've done in the last 4 or 5 years to, from Dorico 1 to 3.5. It's pretty staggering what they've done. But now I think that they have the core functionality that we'll see more Dorico and Cubase integration coming in the future. So, okay, question. Still trying to float the transport bar, or was I dreaming? Thanks, Greg. You could try just hitting F2. So if we have like our project here, we can hit F2 and that will give you a floating transport bar here. So I see comment Greg likes the 21st century avant-garde compositions. I'm just a terrible composer. That's all. So I just had to come up with something horrible. So I wish I could compose. I'm, always so envious watching like Hans Zimmer work and stuff like that. and people are just such, you know, so incredibly good. So. Okay, so I'm just seeing comment from Sofianos. You asked a question 2 times, but no answer. I'm sorry if I missed it. If you want to just ask your question again, I'm sorry if I missed it. But yeah, maybe if you could ask again, I'll try to get to it in the Hangout. Sorry. Sometimes there's a lot of text to read through, but I tried not to miss any questions, even if they're hard and I don't know the answers. I tried to attack it and see if we could figure it out. Okay, my timeline jumped one more time, so okay. So just seeing, hi there. Do you any latency on Cubase 10.5 for any plugin? You know, each plugin can cause, you know, varying amounts of latency. You know, sometimes if it's added after a track's been recorded, it's delayed, it's compensated for. But you know, if you put on an input channel, it may not be compensated for. So, but one way to see is if you actually come over here, you could just go to activate the channel latency. And as we turn on different inserts here, for example, and I turn on a multi-band compressor, we can now see the latency of the channel. So if I wanted to go to a pitch correct plugin, you know, whatever, we can now come over here and see the latency that's going on for each plugin. Okay, reading through comments here. Okay, so reading more discussion about the latency. Okay, so it says when metronome is on, I have latency for my projects. It isn't sync. So, you know, the first thing you want to do to minimize latency, and if it's a larger project, you may have to raise the buffer. But if you come over here, you could say, when you go to your studio setup, we go to the Steinberg UR20, like here, you select your audio interface and you go to the control panel and you could adjust the latency there. Now, sometimes if you're recording and you have like a lot of effects on your master bus, which I would tend to avoid using during recording. I know a lot of people will just sit there and load up their master effects bus with a lot of plugins and they're tracking, you know, and that's going to add latency as you do that. If you go to the lower left-hand corner, there's this little function here that's called constrained delay compensation. So for the plugins that are taking a lot of latency, if you turn that on, that will bypass those plugins so that you could play and get better performance because those plugins have been disabled during recording. So, and sometimes that could throw people off. You know, I saw a message on Facebook from a composer who's like, I just turn this on and and all of a sudden the plugin isn't working. What's wrong? And really all it was is they had to constrain delay compensation. It was a plugin. It was going to add a lot of latency. So try turning on your constrained delay compensation, and that should help with that. Yeah, just seeing a comment from Ambient Dave. Yeah, it says, Hans Zimmer is such a great composer. I'm amazed how he works in Cubase. Yeah, I mean, he puts so much effort into his work. It's just inspiring to watch his dedication. I got to help him out by email last night, so it's always a joy to hang out with him and spend time with him when I do. So very fortunate. So I see question. Hi, I've heard from multiple composers who run gigantic VST templates that Intel processors are better optimized for Cubase than AMD. Can you verify this? I've kind of gone back and forth over the years. I've heard I haven't tried out one of the latest, Ryzen chips. I've heard really good things about it. I periodically will check in I have a lot of friends that do custom PC builds, high power, builds for DAWs. And I think they've been very impressed with the AMD performance, especially for multi-core stuff. So, those guys are always pretty good resources because they're the ones that are getting the latest, greatest everything and trying it out and, trying to get the best thing. But I think, I've heard a lot of really good things about the latest AMD Ryzen stuff, especially for multi-core stuff. Then a lot of people seem to really like them. I had a big AMD system like when Opterons were new and 64-bit, but I've heard a lot of really good things about how the AMD stuff is working. So okay, my timeline is jumping a lot today. All right. And just seeing some other people. I guess Jazz Dude is using Horizon and seems to really like it. Okay, so you see, sorry, Greg, Jazz Dude, pressing F2 on the Mac Pro, adjust the brightness, help. Just love that floating transport bar. So it's still available. You could go to transport and just turn on transport panel. Yeah, and the thing that's really super annoying with Mac is they try to take over all the function keys on the computer keyboard. So if you're on Mac, go to your keyboard, and then you'll see that when you come here, it's going to be keyboard. You want to use F1, F2 keys as standard function keys. Turn that on, and then you could use your function keys for so many kind of really essential, functions in Cubase. So again, come over here to go to your system preferences, and on the Mac under keyboard, that's not checked by default. Do that, and then you'll be able to hit F2 just like I'm doing now on my Mac and have it show up for you. Okay, so it says you have hardware integration with some of your interfaces. Is this integration available for third-party interfaces as well? Is there an SDK available? It's not necessarily through an SDK that does it. We have an SDK for remote control, apps. But a lot of programs, because we make a DAW and the hardware, and the hardware is kind of manufactured by our colleagues at Yamaha, but we're all in the same family. And it would be Steinberg branded. But at that point, the age old problem is that, you have the hardware company, and when they have onboard DSP, they try to do it in the mix console, like the mixer applet that's outside of the DAW. So other companies have done this in the past. It's just that many of them choose not to. So it's not that we don't allow that. We've done it for years. We did it with Lexicon. We did it with, Yamaha from the CBX D5. We've done projects with third-party companies all the time. But most third-party companies don't choose to do that. So it's not necessarily an SDK, but there is a remote control SDK. But often it's, making sure that it shows up as, many of them don't even run as VST plugins that you could run, powered off of the hardware itself. So it's not limited by Steinberg, but many of the third-party hardware companies just choose not to implement or design their hardware for that because it probably just takes more effort. So you see, it would be really great to be able to set the MIDI clock offset plus or minus per MIDI interface. I don't really use Ableton, but that's a feature I like. I'm not sure if it's so critical with, depending on your operating system. I think it might have been more critical in earlier days before there is timestamp information, especially on Windows. But I think it's kind of handled at the OS level. Okay, so just reading through different comments. Thanks for all the great questions people have had. Okay, just reading through. So lots of great discussion. Okay, so question. Hi, is it possible to filter out with the input transformer note durations less than 0.009 and velocity 1 through 15? I'm using a MIDI guitar in a live situation. All right, so let's take a look. Come over here to our input transformer. So we'll set up two different conditions. So here we want to filter. So we'll say notes that have a velocity, which would be value 2, inside range 1 through 15. And let's see if we could do the length. So we'll come here and do filter. Type is equal to notes. And let's say value 1. We want to do, let's say type, maybe set the, okay, let's see if we can. Let's see if we can get this. All right, so we're going to take notes. So I think we can get the velocity. So I'll see if I could play. If you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I could see if I could figure out how to minimize kind of like the false short notes that are triggered. But I'm kind of not seeing a way of doing it right now. But if you want to email me, I'd be happy to kind of work on it a bit more over the weekend. Okay, let's go on. I know we had a few questions that were sent in advance, so we'll get to those in just a minute. And just probably a further discussion on is there any way to solve latency with some plugins? You know, some plugins and combination of plugins are going to cause latency. So try the, constrained delay compensation. Okay, says Greg, I'm a new Cubase 10.5 Pro user. I have my project saved on an external SSD. When I create empty, it always names it untitled. Is there a way my project folder can have a name? So when you do this, go to what I always recommend is go to File to New Project and just prompt for project location here. So right above Open Other, it's a little setting here. And then we could choose Create Empty. And as we do this, now you could define a folder from Windows or Mac, give it a name, create, and then that's where all of your files for that project will be. And now what I would do is just save and give it a name because it's going to be in that folder that we created, and give it a name. And then probably all the file management will make a lot more sense. Let's see. There's a question. Is there any way to see the waveform on freeze tracks? I think if the tracks are frozen and the audio waveform is there in the background. But if we have, let's come over here. I'll just, so if I'm here, I'll just go ahead and draw some notes in. All right, and then let's choose to freeze the track. So we'll freeze the instrument only. So I think that so when you do this, it's intended to be really easy, but when we go to, let's say, our pool window, I think there is a way to kind of access it within a pool window. But let's say if we unfreeze this, but if you want it to do that, another way, let's say if we keep the freeze files, I'm just curious if at this point, if it shows up in edits. I forgot where it actually shows up, but I think if we look within that particular project folder, so we'll go to projects here. That you'll have a folder that's called freeze, and that's where that file is. So you could drag it out. But, another way of doing that is just using, the render in place. So I could come here, choose, and this is where render in place can make a lot more sense. I'll just come over here. Let's do the channel settings. I'll choose to mute or disable the track. So at this point, we'll just come right over there. So I'll mute the track. I could have the MIDI right there. It's going to render it as my WAV file. So that's why I kind of prefer personally render in place. Okay, so question, where can I find more info about the remote SDK? I think if you go to the Steinberg channel, you can, if you go to the Steinberg website, you could actually send an email and you could have the remote SDK sent to you. All right, so I know we had a couple questions that were sent in advance, so let's go through those. We didn't have a lot, and again, if you want to send questions, you could always send it to clubcubase at steinberg.de. So let's go take a look. Okay, so let me go back over to my computer, go to my Word doc. So I have many events next to each other. How can I quickly select a range of them? If I click on the first in a series, I can't click on the last while pressing, for example, the shift key to select them. Usually I can't click on the first and drag my mouse over to the last to select it as it then moves the first selected event. If I used a range selection tool, it does not actually select the event, make it black to show it's selected. So I can't use that to select. And for example, mute all the events in the range. Example, in the image below, how do I select all the events that I have colored blue? So it's kind of a number of subsequent events like this. So the quickest way to select like a range of events is just to hold, if you use the left and right arrows, you can just select the events. So if you're on the first event, hold down the shift key, and then you could select a range of events very fast. So if I wanted to come here, hold down shift and left arrow, or shift and right arrow. So at this point, I could just hold down the first event and shift right or left arrow. And I think once you have that key combination down, that will make a lot of sense for you. Okay, and we had another question where someone wanted me to see if I can make a macro, which I think I was able to do. So they sent a video, says inputs, you have 3 bars, A, B, and C. The second bar with events B is selected using the range selection tool output. So I want A, B, empty bar, then C. So it says using edit range, insert silence, events to the right of the selection start are moved to the right to make room. Events that are intersected by the selection range start are split, and the right selection is moved to the right. So bottom line, in 3 bars A, B, C, the second bar with events B is selected using the range selection tool output. You want A, B, then empty, and C. So what they kind of want to do is to select a range of events. And let me just grab a longer file over here. So they want to be able to select this range, add this amount of silence to the right of that, and for that particular range, and then insert that amount of silence and move this over to the right. So I just created a macro, and I played around with this, and you may be able to do this with fewer steps, but what I created was just in key commands, and I called it add silence after event. So the functions I put were edit split range, edit insert silence. I start with the combine tool here, and then I set it to the combined selection tools on and off. I set it to the normal selection tool, navigate to the right twice. I set transport to locators, locate previous event, edit, move to cursor, and combine selection tools on and off to get that status back. So if I've done this right, I can come over here, I'll select a range. It will trigger this macro. So add silence after the event. And let me just see if we got it here. So what that did was take this event, and it had moved it all the way over and then back over and then inserted that silence. So once again, we'll just come here. We trigger that macro. And the macro, again, I'll leave it up just for a second so that we can copy it down so you can create your own macro. Again, just these steps here. And that's why I found it worked pretty consistently. All right, I'll leave that up and read the next question. It says, I contacted you via YouTube on today's live stream, and you must have misunderstood me. What I meant was to have 4 separate outputs, and this is kind of a continuation from a question from Tuesday, I believe. Take 4 separate outputs from the audio connections panel in Cubase Artist M5 and have one effect, in my case, a compressor EQ, route that to separate buses here. You can see the highlighted main output buses all named differently. I want to route them to one compressor, not 4 to 5 separate compressors. Okay, so we'll go ahead and close this out. So what they wanted was they have outputs here. So let's say if we added a bus and they added 4 stereo outs. And when we look at our output mixer here, we'll see our 4 stereo outs, and they wanted one compressor for all of these. So at the stage where the audio is going out of the audio interfaces, which the output is here. So this is going out of the physical port. We're going to have to send these to the same, we're going to have to send it to different, there's no collective way of sending as they're being routed to outputs. So you're going to, at this point, there's no kind of destination other than being physically going out of Cubase. So if you want to have compressors on all those channels, you're just going to have to add separate dynamics. So you're going to have to add separate compressors to those outputs like that. So that's the only way, because, if it was to any other source, we could route it to our group or route that to an output. But when it's being sent physically out, there's no catch after it's going out. So that's why you'd have to route them individually. All right, we'll just do a couple more questions and we'll get wrapped up. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Let's see if we can... Okay, so let's see. So we had just a question about the key earlier. Let me see if I could find for toggling. Let me just add some audio tracks here. Okay, I'll try Alt Shift here. Someone suggested. I think that sets it all to the same. So maybe I have a setting in my computer wrong. All right, so let's see if we can do one or two more questions and wrap up because I've been going for a while here. Okay, so I see question. I have a problem deleting files. Could you please show how it's done? So, if you've recorded, I'm not sure what files you have, but if you've recorded files and you find that, let's say, okay, that was a horrible take, and now I have, a whole bunch of files I'm not using. If that's the case, what you want to do is just go to your pool window and you could say, remove unused media. And then that will go to the trash. You could send it to the trash and you could empty the trash. So, but I'm not sure what other files you have. So, okay. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. We've gone about 3 hours and 53 minutes. So I want to thank everyone for all the great questions. I hope that everyone has learned something new and learned a new tip. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, try to make sure that you go ahead and subscribe and give it a thumbs up. That's always helpful. Let your friends know we'll be doing probably the next hangout on Tuesday, starting at the same time. So look for that if you want to send questions in advance. Check out, please send to Club Cubase at steinberg.de. Check out the Nuendo promotion that's currently going on. There's also recently a Spectral Layers hangout that happened on Wednesday. So if you want to learn more about Spectral Layers, I think it's about an hour and a half long. So I'm looking forward to watching that over the weekend myself. So check out those different things. I want everyone to please stay safe and healthy. And make sure that for everyone who's a dad that's celebrating Father's Day this weekend, happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, and please have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday, and we'll go ahead and end the stream, and please take care. Goodbye.